so much, Sean, and thanks, families, for joining us today. We're really excited about sharing with you today supporting student well-being during remote instruction. We have three main goals, three main sort of ideas that we want to talk about today. And they are opening communication with your child and developing autonomy and intrinsic motivation, co-creating consistent and predictable routines, and then we'll finish up with creating a student self-care plan and a family self-care plan. And I just want to kind of reiterate what Sean said. We are super happy to answer questions. And if you want to put questions in the chat box while we're sharing, if you want to unmute and ask, please feel free to do that. We're really interested in being responsive to your needs. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I want to start first by talking about autonomy. So autonomy is the ability of a person to act on their own free will. And when a child has autonomy, even in small ways, it helps them to build confidence, to build self-esteem, of course, to build independence. And it's also a super critical part of learning for all teens, all kids and teenagers. They learn how their choices and their actions influence outcomes, and having autonomy helps them to develop a sense of self. The autonomy of kids and teenagers is almost always limited by their families, by their parents, and developmentally appropriate, right, and responsive to context. So I just want to kind of keep that in mind as we're talking about autonomy. We know that the boundaries of autonomy are going to be developmentally appropriate. They're going to be set by you as family members. An example that I have for sort of how context plays a role in this is my own family. I'm a single mom. I have just one son. And I noticed that my sister, who has two sons, was much stricter. She had much stricter rules for her kids. Her family needed more boundaries on behavior because the kids' choices obviously would impact each other, right? And I didn't need to have those same kinds of boundaries because the context of my family life as a single mom with an only child was really different from hers. And I'm sharing this illustration because this is an example of the level of autonomy my son had was different from his cousins, and that was based on our family context. Autonomy is a key element in developing intrinsic motivation. As families, we have, many tools available to us to motivate kids to do the right thing. We just talked about developing boundaries and how those are developmentally appropriate and responsive to context. Connecting this idea to motivation, ultimately, we want our kids to make good choices because they want to make good choices, right? The rewards of doing the right thing are connection and belonging to our family, belonging to a greater community. Kids, teenagers, families, we set goals for ourselves and then we work to achieve those goals. So, but how can kids get to the point of intrinsic motivation if they don't have some sense of control and of sort of being in charge of their own feelings, their own thinking, and their own behaviors, right? So this is true for really young kids, it's true for older kids. We can see it starting to emerge even in kindergartners who, want to pick out their own clothes, or they want to learn how to tie their own shoes. We see it with our little ones when they, don't want us to help them anymore. And we see this with our kids as they get older when they're starting to kind of break away from, they don't always ask our opinions on things anymore, or, they're trying to buy clothes or things, that might be a little bit different than what our preference is. I still can't make sense of, the jeans where the holes are so big that I'm like, those are new jeans? I can't tell. But teenagers like them. And so they're making that as their own choice. So kids can take ownership of their learning when they are given opportunities to make choices. And that's an important thing that we think about as educators, building choice and autonomy into the lessons that we're facilitating. This can feel scary for us as adults though, right? Giving up some of our control in hopes of helping our children to gain independence and agency. But agency is really important for kids and teenagers as they learn how to take responsibility for their own learning and for their own behaviors. So how can we help kids have agency over their learning, over their thinking, over their feelings, right? And one of the ways that we can do that is by sort of engaging in dialogue with them through curiosity and not judgment, right? So offering some open-ended questions, giving lots of wait time for teenagers to engage with us, maybe offering multiple ways of responding. I'm giving some examples on this slide of how we might give some limited choices or perhaps offer choice in the order things are done, content, context, maybe working with our kids for them to set their own goals and then develop the steps to achieve those goals, and or possibly entering into shared agreements with them. I wanted to just pause for a second and ask if there are any participants who maybe you'd like to offer in the chat box some suggestions or some ideas of ways that you've been able to help your kids develop some autonomy. Are there examples that you might share about giving limited choices or entering into shared agreements with your kids that maybe we could share out with the group, either through the chat box or unmuting? Does anyone have any ideas or want to share some of an example of how you have helped your child develop autonomy? Tabitha and I have a couple of examples that I'll share, and if they kind of bring anything to mind and you want to add, go ahead and feel comfortable typing or unmuting. Okay, so one of the things I think about in offering limited choices is in my family, I already shared with you, it's just me and my son. It's never been a choice in our family about whether or not we're going to go to a church service on the weekends. But what I was able to do as my son grew older is I allowed him to determine which service we would go to. And it actually turned out to be a really cool limited choice that I kind of gave him because he always would choose the late morning service, and it turned into being sort of a win-win for both of us. He wanted to go to late service because then I would take him out to lunch and I'd let him pick where we would eat, and he would kind of get that kind of perk out of it. For me, it was really great because I was getting to spend an extra hour with him, face-to-face conversation, and you know, it was a time when we could really connect with each other. So that was a really great actually a great sort of side benefit to helping him develop some autonomy in our family.
I have an example for the order, allowing kids to decide what order tasks will be completed. So this last year, my daughter got a job. She actually worked at Topside here in Steilacoom, and she would get home around 9:30, 10:30 at night, depending. And one of her tasks that she was responsible for at home is taking the trash and the recycling to the curb on Mondays for pickup on Tuesday. So she's home all day until like 3 o'clock until work. And then she gets home at 10:30. And in my mind, it makes sense to take all of that out when the sun is up, when it's light outside. But for her, she had set an alarm and she would do it when she came home from work late at night. So instead of nagging her and asking her to do it during the day to make sure that it was done before Tuesday morning, I just gave her that responsibility and trusted that she would do it and let her do it the way that she, thought was the right way to do it. And when she wanted to do it, and she did it. And so that was better for her and I, because she wasn't crabby about it and I wasn't nagging her.
Nice. And so a couple of other examples we might give is just like working with your child to let them set a goal. Maybe your teenager really has this goal to get a car when they turn 16, or they want to have a big thing in our family was that my son wanted to have a pair of Yeezys, which are super expensive sneakers. And so he kind of set that goal for himself, and then he would determine, what are the steps he needed to accomplish that goal. And then the last idea I have is entering into shared agreements. And I kind of like this language over the language of like a contract, because a shared agreement really implies that we're cooperating in this, and it's much more of a team effort than it is a sort of like, you promise to do this or else this will happen or this won't happen. So supporting children's autonomy and agency is an important step to opening communication with your child, because this way they can join into the conversation as a partner with you, and they can communicate with you about what their needs are and what their preferences are.
So now let's talk about co-creating consistent and predictable routines to help student well-being. First of all, there's a strong emphasis on the co-creating part of creating consistent and predictable routines. If they aren't created with everyone's concerns, considerations, and preferences in mind, they aren't likely to be followed or useful for your family. We posted a video for the resources to access for this class on collaborative problem solving. And this is a technique that is really helpful when collaborating or co-creating with someone else. And we're just gonna go over 3 of the simple steps right now. But if you want to know more, please do watch that video. So collaborative problem solving talks a lot about challenging behaviors and lagging skills, but don't let that make you think that it's not a strategy and a form of communication that can be used for any time, any kind of problem solving or planning. A few examples, when they talk about lagging skills, a few examples of this could be executive functioning, which is a lagging skill in all kids because the executive functioning skills are in the prefrontal cortex, and that is not fully developed until their mid-20s. So they're all lagging in this skill at some point in time when they're younger. And again, if you want to learn more about that, please look at the slides or the recording of last week's SEL class that Mary and I did. So another example would be frustration tolerance and regulating responses to emotions. Those are 2 more examples. And again, every kid and most adults can use some work in that area as well. Challenging behavior examples can be anything from refusals to unsafe behavior. Even procrastination can be something that challenges your student, and collaborative problem solving can, to co-create consistent and predictable routines, can really help with that. Another resource you might want to look at is the website Lives in the Balance. It has a lot of resources and more details on this process. But today we're just going to look at the 3 simple steps. So first of all is the empathy step. This is where you gather information from your child or the person you're speaking with to clarify their concerns, their considerations, and their preferences on the topic that you're bringing up with them. And then second step is define the problem or whatever it is that the situation you're trying to figure out. So here the adult communicates their concerns and their perspective on the situation. And then thirdly is the invitation step. So the child and adult brainstorm solutions to address the concern or to co-create the structure, such as a new routine. So you invite the child to collaborate with you. So this is a conversation you definitely want to have when emotions are at baseline. When emotions are elevated or someone is frustrated or has their feelings hurt, it's not a time to have this conversation. This strategy is best used when everyone has access to those executive functioning skills in their prefrontal cortex. So let's just walk through what it sounds like, what the steps sound like. So it could sound like this. And the empathy step. I've noticed that sometimes you struggle getting started with school in the morning. What are your thoughts about that? And then define the problem. So you're saying why you're concerned about it after you've given them plenty of opportunity to explain their thinking about it. I'm concerned because I want to make sure you have what you need to be successful with school, and I can't always be here in the morning when your online classes start. And then thirdly, the invitation. I was thinking that maybe we could look at shifting your morning routine a little, making sure you are getting what you need from me before school starts. And then again, handing it over to them to talk and problem solve. So of course you just change the language that fits you and fits your child. You know, you could at the end, instead of saying, what are your thoughts? You could say, what's up? Or any number of things. And then it can also sound like this. So Mary and I are going to kind of model what it might sound like. I'll be the parent and she'll be the child. So I've noticed that sometimes you have your door open in the morning before I leave for work, and you come and find me to check in, and then sometimes it's closed and I don't always see you in the morning, especially when I leave for work early. What do you think about not seeing each other in the morning when that happens?
I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I don't feel like talking in the morning, but it feels weird if I don't see you until after you get home from work.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Whenever I come to check in with you, you ask me so many questions. And if I'm already feeling nervous about the morning, I don't want to answer your questions.
That makes sense. I don't want to make you feel more nervous. And it feels weird to me too when we don't see each other in the morning. I'm just concerned that it'll feel like I'm not available to you or not interested in your day. I like to see you. I really like to get a hug before I leave, and it just makes me feel like I know you're going to do great the rest of the day and you've got what you need. I also want to help you feel less nervous. I was thinking that maybe we could shift our morning routines a little so that we make sure you get what you need from me before school starts, and then I know that you'll be okay before I go off to work. And we get to connect with a hug. What do you think about that idea?
What do you mean about changing our routines? Like, can you give me an example?
Well, I could stop asking you a bunch of questions to start so that you feel safe to check in with me no matter how you are feeling. Maybe I could ask my questions at dinner or before bed, or when do you think would be better for you?
I think that would be good. If I want to tell you things or if I want to talk, I could just let you know somehow. I can keep my door open so you can feel comfortable checking on me even if I don't come out. Or maybe I could just come out in the morning too and just try to talk to you.
Okay, I think that's a good start. I like those ideas. Maybe we can write some things down about how we see each of us sees the morning going, and then see where we can add some intentional time to connect, and maybe think of something you could start your day doing to help with the nervous feelings you have sometimes. So now we're going to look at an example of what the routine looked like before the collaborative problem solving, and then what it looked like after. Um, so right now, there's much in our lives that we can't predict. And in-person learning, is it going to be at school? Is it remote? Being able to go outside or not because of the air condition like this week? Will the Wi-Fi work today? Lots of things feel new and different, which makes it hard to predict what will come next or what it will look like, which can be really stressful. But if we build some things into our days and to our students' day that are routine and happen every day, they can count on them, and that can really help them. So when we're doing that, here are a few things to consider. So the structure of the routine, do we need to include it within the schedule of the day, or does our family already have some routines we all count on naturally and we can just add in a few things naturally? And then secondly, making sure healthy mental activities are a part of our routine, especially daily connection with each other and our family. And you can learn more about those if you watch the recording from last week, but we will touch on them in a minute. And then is what's happening now already working for everybody? Then you don't need to make any adjustments, or do certain times of the day need adjustment? And does everybody agree what needs to be adjusted? And then fourth, this is really important, don't make changes that are so drastic or complicated, they won't end up being followed. If you need to change many things in the routine, change just a little bit at a time, so that it can be useful. So here's a routine for—
Excuse me. I'm
Oh,
sorry. You cut out. You cut out right after you said the most important thing.
oh, did I? Okay, let me repeat that. Can you hear me?
Yes, no, you did.
Okay, so the most important thing is not to make changes that are too drastic or complicated that they won't end up being followed. If you have a lot of things that need to be changed in the routine, change a little bit at a time so that it's not overwhelming. Okay, so this is the child's routine before the collaborative problem solving. So there's just a regular wake up bathroom, but sometimes afterwards, eating breakfast, and sometimes just laying back down in bed, and sometimes talking to a friend on FaceTime, then getting ready for class, and then reading before class starts. And then for the adult in the household, the same thing, getting ready for work, but then sometimes eating breakfast with the child if it matches with their time, knocking on the bedroom door to ask if the child needs something because they didn't have the door open, or leaving early soon after the child wakes up and then possibly not connecting and leaving for work. So now, after that conversation, here's the agreement and the changes in the routine. So same thing, wake up, bathroom, brush teeth, but instead of laying back down or eating breakfast, playing until the parent is ready for breakfast so that they can eat breakfast together. And this is also to kind of help with the nervousness, and play is one of the 7 mental healthy things to add. And even for teenagers, even though their play might look different, we all need play, even though it looks different for each of us. And then next, breakfast with mom. And while they are eating, the student can choose to listen to music together. So that means I'm not up for too much conversation or chatting. And then the hug and getting ready for class. And then if there's time, FaceTime with a friend. And so then for the parent, pretty much the same, but making sure to eat breakfast with the child, making sure there's time for that. And then if the parent needs to leave early for work, they would made an agreement to talk about that the night before and make decisions about that. So here's the healthy mind platter I was referring to. Mary goes into lots of different detail and gives you ideas what each of these things might look like for different age students. Okay, so there's a little bit more to consider. So another thing to include in daily routines, especially those around school and studying, are the 3 main ingredients for intrinsic motivation. And so Mary talked already about autonomy, helping students to become more independent by fostering autonomy. And then next, we have purpose. So helping children to look to the future is one way you can add purpose to things in their routine for school, for chores and things like that. Seeing the big picture to make sure there's a sense of purpose in all areas of their lives. For example, even very young children, if you ask them, what do you want to be when they grow up? They typically have an answer, even though it changes throughout the years. So kind of using their current future goal to give purpose to learning to read, to keeping their room clean, to helping out in the house and things like that, being kind to others. For me, when I was 5 years old, I wanted nothing more than to be a waitress in a fancy restaurant. I thought that was just like the best job in the world. And so my mom really leveraged that and really used that to her advantage. If anybody wanted anything from the kitchen, it was my job to get it. You know, I learned to clear the table and do dishes real early because I was in practice for a fancy restaurant. And then there's also really looking at the student now, the child now, and we call that me here now. So kids are really focused on themselves all through the ages, I think. And so using your child's current concerns and preferences into the purpose of the routine can help, and helping them kind of recognize them will help with purpose as well. And
I
so
would,
this,
oh,
oh yeah, go ahead.
sorry. I was just thinking about my son as he was growing older. He wanted to have more access to like power tools and stuff like that. And so one of the things that I did to kind of foster some, autonomy and some purpose in that is I used that desire that he had for like yard work. And so when he would talk to me about power tools and wanting to be like, to have some of those things in the house, the way that I kind of eased us into that process was to, have him using the sort of power tools that go along with like yard work and things like that. And so then I could teach him how to use them, and we ended up doing a lot of that work together, right? And so I like one of the things I can remember is we bought a new lawnmower, and we ended up working together to build it, which includes several steps. They're not too difficult, but we could, there was a good couple of hours of us working together to make that happen. So his desire for more responsibility and for using that, well, for accessing more power tools, I was able to help him use that desire, and then I could teach him some skills in that process. So just sort of leveraging their desires in helping them develop intrinsic motivation.
And so then the last piece is mastery. So helping students strive for mastery means that you're helping them to understand making mistakes is okay, because we just try again until we get it right. And along the way, knowing that they can have help. For example, thinking about the long-term goal and helping them recognize, are there pieces of it that I'm already good at? If I can recognize the skills I already have, I know I can get to the next stage and then the next stage and so forth to reach the goal. For students who struggle a lot with school or self-confidence and other area should spend lots of time on things they already have mastered. So things that they are already very good at, right? And things that they feel that they're good at. For example, if your student is great at puzzles, help your student to recognize what part of doing puzzles helps them access math or get better at math. If they're strong in reading and struggle in math, what about reading will help them strengthen their math skills? And so when you're struggling in something, it's really hard for you yourself to recognize what you're good at, right? And so we want to be intentional about pointing that out for our kids. If they always feel like they're struggling, and if they never recognize the things that they do well, they can get really frustrated and just kind of give up on all of it. So you want to make sure that they are accessing things that they are successful at as a regular part of their daily routine.
Tabitha mentioned the Healthy Mind Platter and reminded us that it's important to make sure healthy mental activities are part of our routine. And we've heard a lot about self-care recently. It's an important practice to incorporate into our overall well-being plan. Self-care is really about purposeful actions to improve your health. And this includes physical health, mental health, emotional health. Basically, the important word here is purposeful, right? Purposeful practices that support healthy minds, healthy bodies, and healthy hearts. And so our teachers and our schools have been really intentional about building breaks into schedules to encourage learners to build time in their day for movement and healthy snacks and fun time. But maybe you have, or maybe not, thought much about working with your kids to help them create a self-care plan. This was kind of a new awareness for me over the course of maybe the last 6 or 8 months. I've talked a lot with teachers and with families about stress in general, and sort of uncovering the stress that kids are feeling, but I hadn't ever really thought about helping kids purposefully design their own self-care plan. And so I'm kind of elevating that now because I think, at least for me, it was something I thought about for adults, but not necessarily for kids. And so we know that practicing self-care routines can reduce the risk of developing mental health conditions like anxiety and depression, and that the earlier people learn self-care, the more likely they are to maintain these good habits into adulthood. We've really been emphasizing the importance of partnering with kids to co-create wellness routines. And so we also made a tool that you might find useful for starting to have these conversations with your kids. So I'm going to share this tool that we developed. And also, I will make sure that this is part of the resources that you have after tonight's presentation. And so this is one Google slide, and there's some slides for elementary kids, and then a couple slides for secondary kids. I made one with just text and one with pictures. And so you and your child can kind of decide which one works for you guys. But I just put at the bottom of the sheet, taking care of myself is important. And then along the outside edges of the page, I've put some ideas of ways that teenagers might choose to do self-care. And these are just text boxes, so you could edit these texts to say whatever you want it to say, when your child could kind of talk about what are the self-care practices that they might like to incorporate. And then you just drag these text boxes over to the sheet. So maybe you have a student who really likes to volunteer and do community service projects. They are, the person who spends the most time with their pets, or when they get really stressed, they watch a lot of YouTube videos for funny, pranks or something like that. Maybe they're dancers and like to spend a lot of time outside. So you can see how this is a tool where you can just drag the text boxes over. I did also make one with images, so that if you had a student who responds more to the visual elements, then that's an option too. And so basically what we're doing here is just giving you a tool to open up the space for communicating about this, for saying like, hey, do you have a self-care plan? This is really important. And maybe here are some ideas for what you might include in that. Once you and your student kind of develop a self-care plan, then you're ready to think about creating a family self-care plan. And this link is already shared in the resources for tonight's session, but just really encouraging you to think about it as a family unit and to have a sense of the importance of us as a family taking care of ourselves and caring for each other. So I'm going to pause here and just kind of let you know that I'm adding another section to tonight's session. And I just want to kind of give a little bit of a disclaimer